All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into the world of Georgia real estate license law.
And it can get pretty wild out there.
It can, but luckily we've got some great material to guide us through it.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from an actual real estate course,
Oh, nice.
quizzes, and even some juicy insider tips from a fictional character named Covington Peachtree.
Covington Peachtree.
He served on the Georgia Real Estate Commission, so he's seen it all.
Oh, wow.
And trust me, some of his stories are pretty wild.
Well, I'm excited to hear them because what I find so interesting about this whole topic is that it's not just about passing an exam and getting that license.
Right.
It's about understanding the responsibility that comes with being a real estate professional in Georgia.
Absolutely.
Both for individual licensees and the brokerage firms they work for.
Yeah, it's a lot more than just like, oh, I've got my license, now I can go out and sell houses. It's like a whole other level of responsibility.
It is.
And, one wrong step and boom.
You're in trouble.
You're facing fines, suspension, maybe even worse.
Yeah, it's a minefield out there.
It is, but luckily we've got Covington as our guide through this legal labyrinth.
Perfect.
He's going to help us avoid those pitfalls and understand the why behind all these rules.
Exactly, because ultimately these rules are in place to protect everyone involved.
Everyone.
Buyers, sellers, and the professionals who guide them through these complex transactions.
It's a safety net for the whole industry.
It is.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
The first thing anyone even thinking about a real estate career in Georgia needs to know is GREC, the Georgia Real Estate Commission.
Okay.
They are the ultimate authority, the gatekeepers, the rule makers, and the enforcers.
So they're like the referees.
Exactly.
Making sure the game is played fairly.
Yep.
They decide who gets to play, who gets benched, and what the penalties are if you break the rules.
That's a great analogy.
Thanks.
And what I find fascinating is that they're self-sustaining. They're funded entirely by licensee fees, not by tax dollars.
So licensees are paying for their own oversight.
Essentially, yes.
Interesting.
And GREC even has the authority to adjust those fees to cover their operating expenses.
Smart move.
So, okay, you're dreaming of that real estate career in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go through GREC.
Yeah.
But what does that actually involve?
Well, first, we need to distinguish between salesperson and broker licenses.
Okay, salesperson versus broker.
Right.
Two different animals.
Salespersons work under the supervision of a broker, while brokers have the authority to operate their own firm.
Got it. Different licenses, different levels of responsibility.
Precisely.
So how tough is it to actually get these licenses?
Well, to become a salesperson, you need to be at least 18, complete 75 hours of approved coursework, pass a state exam, and undergo a background check.
Wow, 75 hours.
That's a lot of coursework.
That's a serious commitment.
It is.
I'm guessing the broker's license is even more demanding.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
You need at least 3 years of experience as a salesperson under your belt, an additional 60 hours of coursework, and you have to pass a tougher broker's exam.
That sounds intense.
It is, but here's the kicker.
Okay.
And this is where Covington really emphasized a point that surprised me.
Okay.
The real challenge begins after you get licensed.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. The real estate market is constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's always changing.
New laws, new technologies, new challenges.
So you're saying to maintain your license, you've got to commit to ongoing education.
Exactly.
So it's not just a one and done.
Not at all.
Once you get your license, you're good to go. It's an ongoing process.
It is.
So 25 hours of post-licensing education within your first year.
Yeah.
And then 36 hours of continuing education every 4 years after that.
That's right.
So you're constantly hitting the books, even after you've got that license in hand.
And Covington had some pretty hair-raising stories about what happens when people let those continuing education deadlines slip. We're talking fines, suspensions, even revocations.
Yikes.
So don't let those deadlines slip.
Definitely not.
Stay on top of your continuing education.
All right, so we've got the GREC, the different licenses, and the ongoing education requirements.
Right.
But let's talk about the brokerage side of things, because there's a whole other layer of responsibility at play there.
There is.
Each firm has a qualifying broker, or QB, who's essentially the captain of the ship.
Got it.
They're ultimately responsible for ensuring that everyone in their brokerage is playing by the rules. Training licensees, reviewing contracts, supervising those all-important trust accounts,
Right.
and reporting any violations to GREC.
Big responsibility.
So if someone on their team messes up,
Yeah.
the QB could be held accountable.
Absolutely. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
And the potential consequences for a QB if their affiliated licensees break the law can be severe.
Now, this is where I think a lot of people, even seasoned professionals, can trip up
Oh, yeah.
the world of unlicensed assistants. We all know they can be invaluable,
Yeah.
but there's a fine line between what they can and cannot do.
There is. And Covington actually reviewed a ton of these cases during his time at GREC.
Really?
It's often unintentional. A well-meaning assistant tries to help out,
Right.
but ends up crossing the line,
Yeah.
which can land their employing licensee in some hot water.
So can we break down exactly where that line is?
Sure.
What can unlicensed assistants do?
Think of it this way. Unlicensed assistants can handle administrative tasks,
Okay.
scheduling appointments,
Uh-huh.
maybe even help with marketing materials,
Okay.
all under the direct supervision of a licensed agent, of course.
Of course.
But they can't negotiate deals, show properties, or offer any kind of real estate advice.
Got it.
And I remember this one case from the materials we have.
Okay.
An unlicensed assistant was negotiating lease terms and even collecting security deposits.
Seriously.
Yep. And to make matters worse, they took a fee for their services directly out of the security deposit.
Wow.
No violation.
Oh my gosh.
The salesperson who employed that assistant was slapped with some hefty fines.
Ouch.
All because they didn't clearly communicate the boundaries.
That's a cautionary tale if I've ever heard one.
It is.
Clear communication is crucial when it comes to unlicensed assistants.
Couldn't agree more.
Brokers and licensees need to make sure their assistants know exactly what they can and cannot do.
Right.
Because pleading ignorance is not a winning defense when GREC comes knocking.
No, it's not.
Speaking of serious violations, let's talk about trust funds.
Oh, yeah.
Covington mentioned that trust fund violations were a constant source of headaches during his GREC meeting.
I bet.
It's a surefire way to land in hot water with the commission.
And it's not hard to see why.
Right.
We're talking about earnest money, security deposits, anything of value that a licensee is holding on behalf of a client.
Right. It's not their money.
Exactly.
It's their client's money.
This isn't monopoly money.
No.
These funds represent people's dreams, their life savings.
And the core concept here is the trust account, right?
This separate bank account specifically for holding those funds.
Separate from the broker's personal or business funds?
Completely separate. Commingling those funds is a huge no-no.
And even worse is conversion?
Oh, yeah.
When a licensee actually uses those trust funds for their own purposes.
That's straight up theft.
That's stealing.
And the consequences can be devastating.
I remember another case from the materials.
Oh, yeah.
Where a licensee delayed depositing an earnest money check.
Oh, no.
And ended up using some of those funds to cover their brokerage's rent.
That's a major ethical and legal breach.
Major breach.
It's a recipe for disaster. That's why there are strict rules around trust funds.
Okay.
Depositing, documenting, dispersing, and reconciling, all designed to ensure those funds are handled with the utmost care. And that there's a clear paper trail for every cent.
Because one misstep, even unintentional, can lead to some serious consequences. We're talking license suspensions, revocations, even criminal charges in some cases.
Wow.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have?
GREC is the all-powerful authority.
Yes.
They mean business.
They do.
Getting your license is just the beginning. Ongoing education is key.
Right.
Qualifying brokers have a huge responsibility to keep their teams in line.
Absolutely.
Unlicensed assistants can be a great asset.
Yes.
But communication is key to avoid violations.
Communication is key.
And finally, trust funds are sacred.
Sacred.
Mishandle them, and you're in for a world of hurt.
A world of hurt.
But don't worry,
Oh, there's more.
we're not done yet. Up next, we'll dive into the murky waters of unfair trade practices,
Okay.
where the violations can be a lot more subtle
Uh-huh.
and a lot harder to spot.
Right.
Stay tuned.
Can't wait. Welcome back.
All right, so we've tackled some of the basics.
Yeah.
GREC licenses.
Yeah.
The role of the qualifying broker.
Right.
Now let's get into some trickier territory. The stuff that can really trip people up.
Like what?
Unfair trade practices.
Unfair trade practices. Oh, yeah.
They're like those hidden potholes in a seemingly smooth road.
Yeah.
You might not see them coming, but they can do some serious damage.
And Covington, our GREC veteran,
Yeah.
he warned us about these.
He did.
He said these violations are often a lot more subtle than something like mishandling trust funds.
Right. They're not always blatant, in-your-face offenses.
Nope.
They can be veiled in seemingly harmless actions or even omissions.
Right.
Okay, so let's unveil these sneaky violations.
Okay.
What are some common examples of unfair trade practices that licensees need to watch out for?
Well, deceptive advertising is a big one.
Deceptive
We're talking misleading property descriptions, bait-and-switch tactics, or making guarantees you can't possibly back up.
Like promising a seller their house will sell in a week just to snag the listing.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And remember that case we discussed earlier where the unlicensed assistant was negotiating lease terms?
Yeah.
That also falls under unfair trade practices.
Really?
Practicing real estate without a license is a serious offense,
Right.
whether it's intentional or not.
Because it undermines the whole system of licensing and regulation.
It does.
And then there's the whole issue of undisclosed conflicts of interest.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's a minefield in itself.
It is, absolutely. Failing to disclose that the buyer is your cousin
Right.
or that you have a financial stake in the property being sold.
Uh-huh.
Those are classic examples.
So basically anything that could compromise your impartiality
Yeah.
or give you an unfair advantage.
Transparency is key in real estate.
Transparency.
All parties involved deserve to know all the relevant information so they can make informed decisions.
Now, this next one is something I've always found a bit confusing. Interfering with existing contracts.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give me a clear example of what that might look like in practice?
Sure. Let's say a seller already has a listing agreement with another agent. You can't swoop in and try to convince them to break that contract
Right.
and list with you instead.
So no poaching clients.
Exactly. It's unethical and illegal.
Got it. No poaching.
Now, Covington also had a lot to say about blind ads.
Blind ads, I'd never even heard of those before.
Blind ads are a real pet peeve of mine.
Okay.
It's when an advertisement doesn't clearly disclose that it's being placed by a licensed real estate professional.
So maybe it just lists a phone number and a vague property description, but no mention of the agent or brokerage.
That's a classic blind ad.
Okay.
And it's a violation because it creates the impression that the seller is a private individual,
Right.
not a licensed professional, bound by all the rules we've been discussing.
Which could be misleading for buyers who might think they're dealing directly with the owner
Yeah,
and not someone who's subject to GREC regulations.
exactly. Again, it all comes back to transparency.
Transparency.
Okay, so we've got deceptive advertising, undisclosed conflicts of interest, interfering with contracts, blind ads. Right. Are there any other major categories of unfair trade practices we should be aware of?
Well, I know Covington mentioned something about practicing law without a license.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Licensees need to be very careful not to cross the line
Right.
into offering legal advice.
Stick to the facts, provide resources,
Uh-huh.
but leave the legal interpretations to the attorneys.
Okay, so let's say someone's been accused of an unfair trade practice.
Right.
What happens next?
What happens next?
How does that enforcement process actually work?
Well, it all starts with a sworn written complaint
A complaint.
filed with GREC.
Okay.
That triggers an investigation,
An investigation.
typically handled by a commission investigator.
So someone actually goes out and gathers evidence,
Uh.
interviews witnesses like a real estate detective?
Pretty much. They piece together the facts of the case,
Okay.
and based on their findings, they submit a report to the commissioner.
And then the commissioner decides the licensee's fate.
Well, not quite. They have a few options at that point.
Okay.
They can recommend that GREC dismiss the case if it's unfounded.
Uh-huh.
They can ask for further investigation if more information is needed,
Okay.
or they can refer the case to GREC for further action
Okay.
if the allegations are serious.
So GREC steps in when things are looking pretty bad?
Exactly. And at that point, things can escalate quickly.
Oh, boy.
GREC has the power to issue sanctions,
Sanctions.
which can range from reprimands and fines to license suspension
Oh.
or even revocation.
Wow, so the stakes are pretty high.
They are.
But does the licensee have any chance to defend themselves?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They have the right to a hearing
A hearing.
before an administrative law judge or ALJ.
It's ALJ.
It's like a mini trial
Okay.
where they can present their side of the story,
Okay.
offer evidence, and call witnesses.
Okay.
And they can have legal representation if they choose.
So it's a serious legal proceeding.
It is.
The ALJ then makes a recommendation to GREC.
Uh-huh. Who makes the final decision?
Okay, so there's due process involved.
Yes.
The licensee isn't automatically condemned based on an accusation.
That's right.
But still having to go through a hearing?
Yeah.
Sounds incredibly stressful and time-consuming.
It is, and that's why understanding and following the law is so crucial in the first place.
Right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about what happens when a licensee is accused of wrongdoing. But what about when someone has actually been harmed
Oh, yeah.
by a licensee's misconduct? Is there any way to make them whole?
That's where the Real Estate Education Research and Recovery Fund comes in.
The what?
The Real Estate Education Research and Recovery Fund.
That's a mouthful.
It is. It's like a safety net
Okay.
for consumers who suffered financial losses due to a licensee's actions.
Wait, so there's actually a fund set aside for this?
There is.
Wow.
It's funded by fees paid by licensees.
Okay.
And it's specifically designed to compensate victims of things like fraud, misrepresentation,
Right.
theft of trust funds.
So if a licensee runs off with my earnest money,
Yeah,
I'm not necessarily out of luck.
exactly. The recovery fund can step in
Okay.
and reimburse you.
Up to certain limits, I'm assuming?
Up to certain limits. Of course, there are procedures involved. You have to prove your claim. And the licensee will eventually have to repay the fund.
Right.
But it's there to protect consumers.
That's good to know.
It is.
It's reassuring to know there's a system in place to help people who've been wronged.
Absolutely. So we've covered some pretty dense material in this section. Unfair trade practices,
Yeah.
the enforcement process, and even that safety net for consumers. The recovery fund.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But understanding these nuances is essential
Yeah.
for anyone involved in real estate.
For anyone involved.
I'm starting to feel like I need a law degree just to survive in this industry. But before my head explodes, I think we need a little break from all this legal talk. What do you say we shift gears and explore the more creative side of things?
What's that?
The world of advertising in Georgia real estate.
Advertising. Okay.
Because let's face it, advertising is the lifeblood of real estate.
It is. It's how you attract clients, how you build your brand,
Right.
and ultimately it's how you grow your business.
But as with everything else in this field, there are rules.
Lots of them.
And Covington, our GREC guru, had some strong words of caution about this.
Oh, yeah.
He said advertising can be a deceptive licensee's worst enemy
How so?
because it puts their violations out there for the whole world to see.
Oh, that's a good point.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah.
A misleading ad can land you in hot water faster than you can say open house.
So let's break it down.
All right.
What are the big no-nos that licensees need to avoid when it comes to advertising their services or properties?
So what are the big no-nos that licensees need to avoid when it comes to advertising their services or properties?
Well, first and foremost, you can't advertise a property without the owner's consent.
Seems obvious, but I bet it happens more often than you'd think.
It does. Sometimes an eager agent gets a little too excited about a potential listing,
Yeah.
and they jump the gun on the marketing.
I can see that happening, so always get that written permission first.
Yes.
And make sure it's crystal clear what you're allowed to do.
Exactly. And of course, the ads themselves can't be misleading or deceptive.
Right.
No bait and switch tactics, no exaggerated claims, no fudging the facts,
Truth in advertising, that's a good rule of thumb for any industry, really.
especially in real estate, where consumers need to be able to trust the information they're seeing.
Now, earlier, Covington was ranting about something called blind ads.
Oh, blind ads.
I have to admit, I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Can you shed some light on this for me?
Blind ads are the ones that make me cringe.
Okay.
It's basically when an ad doesn't clearly disclose that it's being placed by a licensed real estate professional.
So, like, maybe it just lists a phone number and a vague property description, but doesn't mention the agent or brokerage at all.
That's a classic blind ad.
Okay.
And it's a violation because it creates the impression that the seller is a private individual, not a licensed professional.
Which could be really misleading for buyers who might assume they're dealing directly with the owner
Yes.
and not someone who's bound by all those GREC regulations.
Exactly. Transparency is key, even in advertising.
Got it. So no blind ads, no misleading claims, no advertising without the owner's consent.
Right.
Are there any required disclosures, anything specific that has to be included in every ad?
Yes. Every ad must clearly identify the name of the brokerage firm the licensee is affiliated with.
So no hiding behind your personal brand or using a cutesy nickname for your business?
No, the brokerage name has to be front and center. And while it's not explicitly required, it's considered best practice to also include the licensee's license number.
Makes sense. More transparency, better for everyone involved. Now, we talked earlier about how technology has really changed the game in real estate. Has that impacted advertising rules at all?
Absolutely. The rise of the internet and social media has created a whole new landscape for real estate advertising, and GREC has had to adapt accordingly.
So are the rules different for online ads versus traditional print or broadcast ads?
Not necessarily. The same fundamental principles apply.
Okay.
Truthfulness, transparency, no misleading claims. But there are some specific guidelines for online platforms.
Like what?
Well, for example, if you're using social media to market properties, you still have to clearly disclose that you're a licensed real estate professional.
So no posting listings on your personal Facebook page and pretending you're just a helpful friend sharing a great deal.
Exactly. Your professional identity has to be clear.
Yeah.
And if you're using any kind of online lead generation tools, those have to comply with GREC regulations as well.
Okay, so the rules for online advertising are still evolving,
Yes.
but the core principles of transparency and honesty remain constant.
Absolutely. And it's crucial for licensees to stay up to date on those evolving rules. Because as we've said before, ignorance is not a defense when it comes to GREC violations.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything. From GREC and its powers to licensing requirements, the role of the qualifying broker, the do's and don'ts for unlicensed assistants, the seriousness of trust fund violations, the nuances of unfair trade practices, the enforcement process, the consumer safety net known as the recovery fund, and now the ever-important world of advertising.
We have. And it's fascinating how interconnected all these topics are. You can't truly understand one without understanding the others.
Exactly. It's all part of the same intricate web of regulations that governs the practice of real estate in Georgia. And that's why our deep dive today has been so valuable. We've given you the tools to not just survive, but thrive in this complex world.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this thought. Knowledge is power. The more you understand about Georgia real estate license law, the better equipped you'll be to navigate its complexities, protect your business, and serve your clients with integrity.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So keep learning, stay curious, and never underestimate the power of a good deep dive.
Till next time.